What's up everyone, welcome back to my channel for another true crime video. Today I am joined by one of my new friends here on YouTube, Phiwe. Phiwe has a true crime channel where she covers lesser known South African cases, and her research is absolutely incredible. She is such an underrated content creator and I'm just really excited to watch her channel grow from strength to strength. But let me let Phiwe tell you guys a little bit more about herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Phiwe and I have a channel called Crime Cases with Phiwe where I mostly talk about South African true crime cases. I'm really excited to be doing this collab with Mfundo because she's someone who inspired me to start my own YouTube channel, so to be able to work with her is really exciting for me. We also did a collab on my channel and we did a video on the Jade Panayatra case, so once you're done watching this, make sure you head over to my channel to watch that video.
One of my favorite videos that she did is actually one of her first videos that she uploaded onto her channel, and that was a video covering the case of the dross rapist Nicholas Nino. I'm so glad that she brought awareness to this case and gave information that wasn't really well known at the time. So big ups to Phiwe for delving into the research required to cover such lesser known cases. I'm really proud of where her channel is going and I just can't wait for it to take off. In today's video, we will be telling the exact same story for the third time. Back in February of 2019, I uploaded my first true crime video, and that was a video covering the case of South Africa's most prolific serial killer, Moses Sithole. A little over a year later, in March of this year, we spoke about the sugarcane killer, Thozamile Taki. And today we will be covering the case of Sipho Thwala, another man that targeted women. Other than being deranged killers, these three men had another thing in common. They all had the exact same modus operandi which they used to lure their victims and unjustly take their lives. By making this video, we mean absolutely no disrespect to any of the families or victims affected by this case. This video is purely for educational purposes and to give the audience more information about this case. I do also want to add an additional trigger warning that in this video I will be discussing rape and sexual assault. I won't go into detail, but I do just want to give you a heads up that those topics will be covered in this video. Sipho Mandla Agmatir Thwala was born in 1968 in a township called KwaMashu, not far from Durban. Due to apartheid's spatial planning, non-white people were not allowed to live in the developed white areas. However, these white areas, they needed cheap labor, and that could only be provided by the non-whites. The areas where non-whites were allowed to live were relatively far from the areas in which they were expected to work, and so the townships were established. The effects of apartheid's spatial planning are still evident today and can explain some of the issues with service delivery in townships and rural communities. Essentially, every town or city had its associated township. Sandton has Alexandra, and Johannesburg South has South Africa's most famous township, Soweto. KwaMashu is just one of Durban's many townships. In addition to non-whites being segregated from the white population, they were also segregated from each other. Indians resided in their own areas and colored people and black people the same. An interesting fact about Durban is that it is a city with the highest population of Indians outside of India and was once home to Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. KwaMashu was named after British colonizer Sir Marshall Campbell, who was a pioneer of the sugar industry in the colony of Natal. He was also a parliamentarian concerned with Bantu affairs. He owned the land that KwaMashu was established on, and so it was named after him. Thwala was born in KwaMashu and also subsequently raised there, meaning that he spent much of his time in Durban and its surrounding areas. He was raised by his single mother, Kathazile Ntanzi, and he also had an older sister, Zibegile, who was about 10 years older than him. Despite having only received a formal education up to grade 1, which at the time was referred to as Sub-A, Thwala was able to read, write, and he could even speak 3 languages, namely isiZulu, Afrikaans, and English. As far as his upbringing, not much can be said as that information unfortunately is not available, but he was an uneducated black man in apartheid South Africa. Based on the information I have given in previous videos, I'm sure you can infer exactly what his life was like growing up. Due to his lack of education and the fact that he grew up in apartheid South Africa, He had very limited career options available to him, but the fact that he spoke 3 languages was beneficial to him, and he ended up working as a laborer in the sugarcane fields of Durban. Durban is the largest exporter of sugarcane in South Africa, boasting many sugarcane fields. During the farming process, the fields are set alight before the next season's crop is sowed. This allows for the field to be cleared of any weeds. It scares away animals such as poisonous snakes and wild boars, and it also allows for nutrients to be restored back into the soil. As someone who worked on sugarcane farms, Thwala was familiar with this practice.
In 1994, Thwala was charged with the rape and murder of an unidentified victim. DNA technology was still in its infancy in the Western world in the 90s, so it was even less established in South Africa. However, it was still standard procedure for police to take DNA and fingerprint samples of someone who was charged, which is something they did with Thwala. However, not much came out of this because he didn't go to trial, so eventually the charges were dropped. Mfundo has spoken about the social-political climate of South Africa after the 1994 elections. During this time, black women in particular were branching out and seeking employment that would never been afforded to them during that era. Many were seeking to further their education or become skilled laborers that would work and hopefully live in white-only areas. The expansion of prospects for black women resulted in an influx of their demand in the service and hospitality industry. Their drive to provide a better life for their families and to seek employment is something that Moses Sithole, Thozamile Take, and now Sipho Thwala took advantage of. In addition to there being township outside of former white-only areas, there were also informal settlements known as squatter camps. And if you go on Google and look at squatter camps in South Africa, you'll see a small portion of the truth. The interesting thing about the portrayal of South Africa in media is that during apartheid, black people were excluded from the financially established narrative, whereas today, they're excluded from the poverty narrative. Thandi Cornelia Majola was a young dressmaker from the Bamba informal settlement outside KwaMashu. On the 15th of March 1996, she was walking along the North Coast Road when she was approached by Thwala. They struck a conversation and he promised her employment at the Four Seasons Hotel in Durban, where he allegedly worked, telling her that she would get a job as a cleaner if she accompanied him to work. In order to get to his workplace, Thwala suggested that they take a shortcut through a sugarcane plantation. Once they got there, he began attacking Majola, beating her and throttling her several times. Somehow during this attack, she was able to reason with Thwala, promising that she would not go to authorities if he let her go. Majola was the only victim to escape with her life.
Less than a year later, in February of 1997, field workers working in the sugarcane fields of Mount Edgecombe near Phoenix discovered a sight they would not soon forget. There in the field lay the partially naked and badly decomposing body of a young woman. Her hands and feet were bound behind her with what looked like torn pieces of clothing. After this grim discovery, the field workers called the police, and Detective Sergeant Marcus Naidu was called to the scene of the discovery. The body of the victim was so badly decomposed and so badly burned that he could not make out the race of the victim. The only reason that he knew that the victim was a female was because there was a dirty white underskirt that had been discarded not far from the body. There was very little evidence that remained unscathed by the fire. On the 14th of April, 24-year-old Phiwe Mfeka was approached by a young, black, and somewhat charismatic man offering her a job as a cleaner at a hotel where he claimed to be employed. The man accompanied Phiwe to her house together with another young woman, and Phiwe told her family about this man's offer. Her older sister, Grace, was suspicious of this man because he was going around recruiting people to work at the Four Seasons Hotel, which is the hotel that he said he worked at. He was recruiting people to work at this hotel, offering them a high salary when he himself looked disheveled. He was wearing a cheap pair of sandals, he was wearing a cheap pair of trousers, and he generally looked unkempt. So Grace was not very comfortable with the idea of her sister going off to work with a man that himself looked unemployed. However, Phiwe was adamant about pursuing this job opportunity as she had a young child to care for, a baby girl. So she left with this man. Grace watched the throuple walk away down the street, but not long after they left, as they walked down the street, the second woman that had accompanied Phiwe and this man, she walked in a different direction, so only Phiwe was left to walk with the suspicious man. Phiwe's family would never see her alive again. A little over 2 months after the first discovery, a truck driver driving past the same area as the first crime scene noticed a dark figure in the fields. On closer inspection, he discovered the second body that was gagged, bound, and burned. From this moment forth, the bodies seemed to pile up. Another badly burned and decomposing body was found in May, and 4 were found in June. Of these 4 bodies found in June, 2 of them were actually identified, with the discovery of Phiwe Mfeka's body on the 20th of June finally giving the case a break. She had been bound, gagged, and raped. The discovery of 12-year-old Gabisile Buthelezi was unique in that not only was she the youngest victim, but she was found on the same day that she had died, the 23rd of June. After the discovery of the 7th body, the detectives from Durban's murder squad were brought in to take control of and spearhead the investigation, and they were led by Superintendent Philip Veldhuizen, who had received special training on serial killers under South Africa's first profiler, MICKI Pistorius. It was Veldhuizen who would confirm that these murders were all committed by the same perpetrator. It was actually only 2 weeks after the murder squad took over the case that the breakthrough on Phiwe's identification was made. She was in fact the 7th victim, and her mother was called to formally identify her. Her mother was able to make a positive identification despite Phiwe's advanced stage of decomposition because of a unique braid that she had installed in her daughter's hair the Sunday prior to her disappearance. Like I said, once the murder squad was brought in, Veldhuizen was able to confirm that they were dealing with a serial killer. Serial killer investigations were relatively new to South Africa at this time. Of course, South Africa had always had serial killers, as we have discussed a few from the past before, but with all that was going on in South Africa between the end of colonization and democracy and everything in between, serial killers were kind of put on the back burner. The study of serial killers, rather, was put on the back burner. That is until South Africa's first serial killer profiler, Dr. MICKI Pistorius, took it upon herself to document and learn about the behavior of South African serial killers. I have briefly mentioned Pistorius in the Moses Sithole video. That was actually her first case as a profiler, and I'm just realizing now that it was my first case that I covered on this channel. It was my first true crime case that I covered on this channel, so that's kind of interesting. She has written a number of books on her work detailing South African serial killers, detailing how their minds work. I think one of her books is called Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer or something like that. I will link all of her work down below, and if you do end up purchasing her work through the links that I will provide, then you will be directly supporting this channel. When Veldhuizen confirmed that these murders were the work of a single perpetrator, he contacted Pistorius for help on the case. She only really got involved, however, after the discovery of the 11th victim. Before her official involvement, Pistorius suggested that police search through their archives for similar cases that were unsolved. On the 1st of July, the police definitively linked an additional 3 murders to the case, bringing the victim count up to 10. All the victims were black women in their 20s to 30s that had been found within a 3-kilometer radius of sugarcane fields between Phoenix, an Indian township, and Mount Edgecombe. Thwala earned himself the moniker of the Phoenix Strangler due to his crime scenes being in such close proximity to the township. On the 12th of July, the second major break in the case came with the discovery of the 11th victim. Despite the fact that the body was now 2 weeks into decomposition, the body had not yet been burned and the crime scene had not yet been visited by any other law enforcement or policing agency. This meant that the team assigned to the serial killer case were able to work with a crime scene that was essentially undisturbed and could therefore gather a lot more evidence than from previous crime scenes. With the discovery of the 11th victim, Pistorius was officially brought onto the case and tasked with compiling a profile of the suspect. She said that because the victims were young black women, the suspect would also be a black man of similar age. She reasoned that this was the case because most serial killers kill intraracially unless motivated by some other factor. This makes it so they won't stick out in the communities that they are targeting, and if they are of the same race and similar age group, their victims are more likely to trust them. Pistorius also stated that the suspect would have received formal education up to a high school level, as he was of above average intelligence. He would be charming to women, but also extremely dangerous. Like I said, profiling was still a relatively new science in South Africa, and despite getting a few things wrong, her profile for the suspect was still fairly accurate when you consider that this is something that was basically still in its developmental stages. Even today, when investigators compile a suspect's profile, it's not always 100% accurate. In fact, it's rarely 100% accurate. There will always be one or two things that are slightly off about the suspect profile. 3 weeks after the murder squad started on the investigation, the news broke in the media. On the one hand, having the public know that there is an active serial killer in the area can be beneficial in that it raises awareness, people can call in with tips, and may even take further safety precautions. The downside to having the public know about the existence of an active serial killer, however, is that the police may be inundated with false leads, which could further slow down the progress of the investigation. The biggest risk, however, is that the killer will know that the police is on their trail. The killer will know that the police is now looking for them and will further try to hide their crimes, or they may escalate further in order to get as many kills in as possible, or maybe even flee completely, meaning that the chances of the police finding this killer could be significantly reduced. With no identikit provided, police and the public had no idea what this possible killer might even look like. That is until one of Mfeka's sisters came forward with information about a man that had offered her now deceased sister a job. With the help of Rachel Mfeka, the investigative team was able to draw up an identikit of the possible killer. Rachel was also able to help the police determine how exactly this killer operated and lured his victims. His modus operandi. Knowing how killers operate, knowing that they will not stop killing unless they are caught, unless they are apprehended, jailed, or dead, that they just keep on killing. Investigators feared that they had possibly missed the discovery of even more victims. They feared that there were more than the 11 victims that had thus been found. At the end of July, the canine unit was brought in and cadaver dogs were used to help search for more possible victims. The dog teams started at the site of the last scene where the 11th victim was found, and within a few hours, another 2 bodies had been found. Upon returning to the cane fields the following day, the dogs were able to sniff out the decomposing bodies of another 5 young black women. All 7 women were found within meters of one another, some only having died just days prior to their discovery. Of the women found in July, I could only find the names of 4. The body of 21-year-old Staff Phumzile Gumede was discovered on the 23rd of July. Mtombeni Ngcobo and 29-year-old Nokuthula Cele were discovered on the 24th of July, and 30-year-old Banothile Dube was discovered on the 26th of July. With the killer being more confident and killing more frequently, he started to make mistakes. At one of the new crime scenes, a cigarette butt was found, and from this, the investigators were able to compile a DNA profile of the possible perpetrator. After the discovery of the 18th body, Veldhuizen ordered SWAT teams to stake out the cane fields so they could catch the killer in action. Unfortunately for Veldhuizen and his team, they did not catch the killer, but instead discovered his 19th and final victim. On the 5th of August 1997, the body of a young black woman in her early 20s was found in a sugarcane field. This body had not yet been burned, and it was the discovery of this body that would finally bring an end to these brutal and senseless killings. When moving the body, detectives discovered 2 used condoms containing semen between the victim's thighs. Within 48 hours, forensic scientists were able to extract a DNA profile from the semen. This profile matched that of the cigarette butt that had been found at a previous crime scene. Pistorius had suggested in her profiling that the perpetrator most likely had a criminal record for rape or a similar crime. With this information, police went through their archives once more, looking for a case that may be similar to the attacks where they could identify a suspect. After a few days of searching, they found a case from 1994 that had never been brought to trial, but where blood was taken from the suspect. This blood sample from the 1994 case was a perfect match to the DNA profile from the condom and the cigarette butt. This DNA belonged to 29-year-old Sipho Thwala. On the morning of the 14th of August, investigators initiated a dawn raid on Sipho Thwala at a shack in the Bestas squatter camp. Obviously, due to our country's past, white officers working in black areas, specifically in impoverished black areas like townships and rural communities, were ill-advised at best. Because of the relationship between police and the community, it was safest for the arrest to take place in the early hours of the morning so that there would be less commotion and resistance from the community. When police came to arrest him, Thwala seemed surprised, but he did not resist the arrest. The police came to arrest him with a Zulu interpreter along with Veldhazen, MICKI Pistorius, as well as the other detectives that had worked on the case. In his shack, investigators found a bag of torn strips of clothing that he used to practice his ligatures. They found women's underwear and women's outer clothing. They found watches, as well as other jewelry that he had collected from his victims. Only 8 of his victims were ever identified, with the rest being buried in unmarked graves. Like I said earlier, his modus operandi was luring his victims with the promise of employment. Something that I have yet to discuss on this channel, however, is signature. And signature and MO are very different things, but briefly, an MO is or are the actions that a killer takes in order to lure his victims and eventually kill them. Every killer, specifically serial killer, has an MO, and it can sometimes vary slightly from victim to victim. Different killers can even have the same MO, as we have seen between Sithole, Taki, and Thwala. Alternatively, a signature is generally unique to the killer. A signature refers to the action or actions taken by the killer in order to essentially complete their act of killing. A victim may already be deceased when the signature is performed, but until that happens to the killer, they have not yet completed their mission. For Thwala, his signature was the gag he used for his victims. He would wad up their underwear or strips of cloth from their own clothing into a tight ball and shove it down their throat. If they were still alive, his victims would be suffocated by this gag. I just mentioned that a victim may already be deceased by the time the signature is performed, and that was actually the case with Thwala. For most of his victims, there was no need for restraints, there was no need for the gag, as they were usually already unconscious or deceased, but Thwala tied them up and gagged them anyway. The investigators were part of a documentary about the case, and in it they go into more detail about the investigation, the murders, and his eventual capture. I will be linking it down below if you are interested in checking out that documentary. It's a very interesting documentary, but it doesn't really add more to this video, so I don't really feel it necessary to include the clips from that documentary. After his arrest, Dr. MICKI Pistorius was sent in to interrogate him, and she asked why he did what he did, why he targeted women, why he raped them and killed them. And he said it was because an ex-girlfriend of his had gotten an abortion without first consulting with him and without telling him that she had aborted his baby without his knowledge. And for that, he was angry at women, so he targeted women that reminded him of his ex-girlfriend. This act by the ex-girlfriend made him hate women, and so he wanted to exact revenge on her through his victims. When hearing of his arrest, Thwala's mother and sister were understandably shocked, stating that in all the time that the murders were happening, he never changed his behavior. He would buy them groceries when he had money, and he even condemned the killings, telling his family that he wished for the killer to be caught soon. Phiwe mentioned that Thwala had a victim that actually survived. This woman was beyond incredible. She ended up testifying against him at his trial as the prosecution's star witness. What she recounted of her time with Thwala is truly heartbreaking. During Thwala's trial, Majola told the court that he had approached her with an opportunity for employment and asked her to accompany him. When they approached the cane fields, he suggested that they cut through as this was a shortcut. And once in the fields, he grabbed her from behind and demanded sex. She begged for her life and agreed to have sex with him. I don't think I need to expand on the fact that the sex was not consensual, even though she agreed to it. I don't think I need to expand on that any further. After raping her, he then asked her to be his girlfriend. When she didn't answer, he started beating her until she once again begged for her life and accepted the proposal. On the 31st of March 1999, Judge Vivian Niles Dana found 31-year-old Sipho Thwala guilty of the 27 charges levied against him at the Durban High Court. Shortly before his sentencing, a rumor spread around Inanda that Thwala had been seen at his family's home. Mob justice is something very common, especially in the rural areas of South Africa, and this rumor led the community to attempt to exact justice on his family. Members of the community locked Thwala's 65-year-old mother and 41-year-old sister, along with her 4 children, inside the house as they prepared to go to church. They then set the house alight, leaving them with no way to escape. Fortunately for the family, a neighbor rescued them from the flames, and from there they went into protective custody at a police station near KwaMashu as they feared for their lives. Thwala had never been to the house since his arrest and subsequent trial. The prosecution demanded that Thwala not receive a singular life sentence for all his crimes, as that would have made him eligible for parole after only 24 years. And as we saw in the last video, it's very possible that had he been given this sentence, he would have been granted parole and he would be free right now. Instead, he was sentenced for each crime separately. For each murder, he was sentenced to 30 years. He was only found guilty of 16 charges of murder, so he only received 30 times 16. 12 years for the rapes, an additional 2 years for the 7 counts of indecent assault, and 12 years for an attempted murder. His overall sentence was 506 years imprisonment. I didn't find any information that stated he had to serve any of it concurrently. First, with the sentence, he would basically never be eligible for parole while still alive. Thwala was sentenced to serve his term at the C-Max Penitentiary in Pretoria, the same place that Sithole was sent to before being moved to Mangaung Correctional Center in Bloemfontein. The pair probably crossed paths in prison, and that is a truly terrifying thought. So I don't have any articles to read for you and comment on, meaning that there is no post-case commentary in this video. Well, my post-case commentary is that women in this country have been under attack for far too long, and it's high time that we seek and receive the justice that we deserve. With all of that said, it does bring us to the end of this case and of course to the end of this video. I want to say a massive thank you to Phiwe for joining me and helping me cover this case. Be sure to check out the video that we did together on her channel, leave a lovely comment, and make sure that you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it interesting, please do give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos from me, subscribe to my channel. Before I go, I do want to give a massive thank you to every single person watching this video, of course, and also to the people that comment on these videos. The comments truly make my day. I really love conversing with you guys and sharing my thoughts and opinions even after I've covered the case and finding out more about you. I really appreciate every single person that comes onto this channel, watches my videos. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!